Consider first the Kalam cosmological argument. 1. If the universe began to exist, then there is a transcendent cause which brought the universe into existence. 2. The universe began to exist. 3. Therefore, there is a transcendent cause which brought the universe into existence. By the universe, I mean that reality which is studied by contemporary cosmology. That is to say, all contiguous physical reality which currently takes the form of space-time and its contents. I take it that 1 is obviously true. Rather, the truly controversial premise is 2. Traditional supporters presented philosophical arguments in support of 2, which for me constitute its primary warrant. But they're not the subject of tonight's debate. Rather, what's emerged during the 20th century is a remarkable empirical confirmation of the second premise from the evidence of astrophysical cosmogony. 2 independent but closely interrelated lines of physical evidence support premise 2. Evidence from the expansion of the universe and evidence from the second law of thermodynamics. In saying that the cosmogonic evidence confirms 2, I am not saying that we are certain that 2 is true. Too many people mistakenly equate knowledge with certainty. When they say that we do not know that the universe began to exist, what they really mean is that we are not certain that the universe began to exist. But of course, certainty is not the relevant standard here. The question is whether 2 is more plausible in light of the evidence than it's contradictory. Professor Carroll reminds us, science isn't in the business of proving things. Rather, science judges the merits of competing models in terms of their simplicity, clarity, comprehensiveness, and fit to the data. Unsuccessful theories are never disproven, as we can always concoct elaborate schemes to save the phenomena. They just fade away as better theories gain acceptance. Science cannot force you to accept the beginning of the universe. You can always concoct elaborate schemes to explain away the evidence. But those schemes will not fare well in displaying the aforementioned scientific virtues. Even many who have expressed skepticism about premise 2 admit that it is more plausibly true than not. For example, in my recent dialogue with Lawrence Krauss, he volunteered, "I bet our universe had a beginning, but I am not certain of it. Based on the physics that I know, I'd say it is a more likely possibility." This is to admit precisely what cosmologists like Alexander Vilenkin have contended all along, that the evidence makes it more likely than not that the universe began to exist. Consider first evidence from the expansion of the universe. The standard Big Bang cosmogonic model implies that the universe is not infinite in the past, but had an absolute beginning a finite time ago. Although advances in astrophysical cosmology have forced various revisions in the standard model, nothing has called into question its fundamental prediction of the finitude of the past and the beginning of the universe. Indeed, as James Sinclair has shown, the history of 20th century cosmogony has seen a parade of failed theories trying to avert the absolute beginning predicted by the standard model. Meanwhile, a series of remarkable singularity theorems has increasingly tightened the loop around empirically tenable cosmogonic models by showing that under more and more generalized conditions, a beginning is inevitable. In 2003, Arvin Bord, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to show that any universe, which is on average in a state of cosmic expansion throughout its history, cannot be infinite in the past, but must have a beginning. In 2012, Vilenkin showed that cosmogonic models, which do not fall under this condition, including Professor Carroll's own model, fail on other grounds to avert the beginning of the universe. Vilenkin concluded, none of these scenarios can actually be past eternal. All the evidence we have says that the universe had a beginning. The Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem proves that classical spacetime, under a single, very general condition, cannot be extended to past infinity, but must reach a boundary at some time in the finite past. Now, either there was something on the other side of that boundary or not. If not, then that boundary is the beginning of the universe. If there was something on the other side, then it will be a non-classical region, described by the yet-to-be-discovered theory of quantum gravity. In that case, Vilenkin says, it will be the beginning of the universe. Think about it. If there is such a non-classical region, then it is not past eternal in the classical sense, but neither can it exist literally timelessly, akin to the way in which philosophers consider abstract objects to be timeless, or theologians take God to be timeless. For this region is in a state of constant flux, which, given the indiscernibility of identicals, is sufficient for time. So even if time as defined in classical physics does not exist at such an era, some sort of time would. But if the quantum gravity era is temporal, it cannot be extended infinitely in time. For such a quantum state is not stable, and so would either produce the universe from eternity past or not at all. As Anthony Aguirre and John Kihayas argue, it is very difficult to devise a system, especially a quantum one, that does nothing forever, then evolves. A truly stationary or periodic quantum state, which would last forever, would never evolve, whereas one with any instability will not endure for an indefinite time. Hence, the quantum gravity era would itself have to have had a beginning in order to explain why it transitioned just some 13 billion years ago into classical time and space. Hence, whether at the boundary or at the quantum gravity regime, the universe probably began to exist. Consider now the evidence of thermodynamics. According to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy in a closed system almost never decreases. Given the naturalistic assumption that the universe is a closed system, the second law implies that given enough time, the universe will come to a state of thermodynamic heat death, whether cold or hot. Given that the universe will expand forever, it may never reach a state of equilibrium, but will grow increasingly cold, dark, dilute, and dead. But then the obvious question arises. Why, if the universe has existed forever, is it not now in a cold, dark, dilute, and lifeless state? P.C.W. Davies gives the obvious answer. The universe can't have existed forever. We know there must have been an absolute beginning a finite time ago. The universe's energy, says Davies, was simply put in at the creation as an initial condition. By contrast, Professor Carroll's solution to the problem confronts serious obstacles. He imagines that the overall condition of the universe is a state of thermal equilibrium, a sort of de Sitter space, but that random fluctuations spawn baby universes which pinch off to become wholly independent spacetimes. We find ourselves in one such baby universe in a state of disequilibrium. Let me raise two concerns about this model. First, not only are the production mechanisms of such baby universes admittedly conjectural, but such a scenario violates the so-called unitarity of quantum theory by allowing irretrievable information loss from the mother universe to the babies. Stephen Hawking, apologizing to science fiction fans everywhere, came to admit, there is no baby universe branching off, as I once thought, the information remains firmly in our universe. Second, Professor Carroll's solution provides no convincing answer to the Boltzmann brane problem. Since the mother universe is a de Sitter space in which thermal fluctuations occur, and since baby universes grow into de Sitter spaces themselves, there's no explanation in the model why there exists a genuine low entropy universe around us rather than the mere appearance of such a world, an illusion of isolated branes which have fluctuated into existence out of the quantum vacuum. These and other problems make Professor Carroll's model less plausible than the standard solution that the universe began to exist with an initial low entropy condition. Skeptics might hope that quantum cosmology might serve to avert the implications of the second law of thermodynamics. But now, a new singularity theorem formulated by Aaron Wall seems to close the door on that possibility. Wall shows that given the validity of the generalized second law of thermodynamics in quantum cosmology, the universe must have begun to exist, unless, as in Professor Carroll's model, one postulates a reversal of the arrow of time at some point in the past, which, he rightly observes, involves a thermodynamic beginning in time, which would seem to raise the same sorts of philosophical questions that any other sort of beginning in time would. Wall reports that his results require only certain basic concepts so that it is reasonable to believe that the results will hold in a complete theory of quantum gravity. Thus, we have good evidence, both from the expansion of the universe and from the second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is not past eternal, but had a temporal beginning. So, the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument receives significant confirmation from the evidence of contemporary cosmology. We have then a good argument for a transcendent cause of the universe.
So I think I can make these points basically by following Dr. Craig's organization, starting with the Kalam cosmological argument. And unlike what he said I should be doing, I want to challenge the first of the premises. That if the universe began to exist, it has a transcendent cause. The problem with this premise is that it is false. There's almost no explanation or justification given for this premise in Dr. Craig's presentation. But there's a bigger problem with it, which is that it is not even false. The real problem is that these are not the right vocabulary words to be using when we discuss fundamental physics and cosmology. This kind of Aristotelian analysis of causation was cutting-edge stuff 2,500 years ago. Today we know better. Our metaphysics must follow our physics. That's what the word metaphysics means. And modern physics, you open a quantum field theory textbook or a general relativity textbook, you will not find the words transcendent cause anywhere. What you find are differential equations. This reflects the fact that the way that physics is known to work these days is in terms of patterns, unbreakable rules, laws of nature. Given the world at one point in time, we will tell you what happens next. There's no need for any extra metaphysical baggage like transcendent causes on top of that. It's precisely the wrong way to think about how the fundamental reality works. The question you should be asking is, what is the best model of the universe that science can come up with? By a model, I mean a formal mathematical system that purports to match on to what we observe. So if you want to know whether something is possible in cosmology or physics, you ask, can I build a model? Can I build a model where the universe had a beginning but did not have a cause? The answer is yes, it's been done. 30 years ago, very famously, Stephen Hawking and Jim Hartle presented the no-boundary quantum cosmology model. The point about this model is not that it's the right model. I don't think that we're anywhere near the right model yet. The point is that it is completely self-contained. It is an entire history of the universe which does not rely on anything outside. It just is like that. The demand for more than a complete and consistent model that fits the data is a relic of a pre-scientific view of the world. My claim is that if you had a perfect cosmological model that accounted for the data, you would go home and declare yourself having been victorious. You might also ask, could the universe be eternal, since Dr. Craig talked about this, without having a beginning at all? And again, the question is, yes, just build a model. This is my favorite model. It's actually not even a model that I think is right, once again. It's a model that I helped create. But it's about the search for models, not about saying that any one model is the right idea. We hope that someday we get there, but we don't claim that we are there yet. So whether or not the universe can be eternal does not come down to a conversation about abstract principles. It comes down to a conversation about building models and seeing which one provides the best account for what we see the universe to be doing. So I'd like to talk about the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, since Dr. Craig emphasizes it. And the rough translation is that in some universes, not all, the space-time description that we have as a classical space-time breaks down at some point in the past. Where Dr. Craig says that the Bordet-Guth-Vilenkin theorem implies the universe had a beginning, that is false. That is not what it says. What it says is that our ability to describe the universe classically, that is to say, not including the effects of quantum mechanics, gives out. That may be because there's a beginning, or it may be because the universe is eternal, either because the assumptions of the theorem are violated or because quantum mechanics becomes important. If you need to invoke a theorem, because that's what you like to do, rather than building models, I would suggest the quantum eternity theorem. If you have a universe that obeys the conventional rules of quantum mechanics, has a non-zero energy, and the individual laws of physics are themselves not changing with time, that universe is necessarily eternal. The time parameter in Schrödinger's equation, telling you how the universe evolves, goes from minus infinity to infinity. Now, this might not be the definitive question, the definitive answer to the real world, because you can always violate the assumptions of the theorem, but because it takes quantum mechanics seriously, it's a much more likely starting point for analyzing the history of the universe. But again, I will keep reiterating what matters are the models, not the abstract principles. Now, Dr. Craig brings up an argument about the second law of thermodynamics, and I've written a whole book, you can buy it on Amazon right now from your iPhones, about the second law and its relationship to cosmology. It is certainly a true question, a true issue that we don't know why the early universe had a low entropy and entropy has ever been increasing. That's a good challenge for cosmology. To imagine that cosmologists cannot answer that question without somehow invoking God is a classic God of the gaps move. I know that Dr. Craig says that's not what he's doing, but then he does it. We don't know why the early universe had a low entropy, but that is not an argument that we can't figure it out. There's more than one possibility. Maybe there is a principle, like Stephen Hawking would say, that puts the early universe in a low entropy state. Or maybe there is no high entropy state. In my model of an eternal universe, the reason why our universe is always changing is because the universe always can change. There is no equilibrium for it to fall into. Dr. Craig brings up a quote, he brings up various things that I think really muddle the cosmological picture here. He says that my model is not working very well because it violates unitarity, the conservation of information, and that is straightforwardly false. In my model, unitarity is the whole point. There's a quantum mechanical wave function that describes the evolution of the universe from one piece into multiple pieces, and that evolution is perfectly unitary. He quotes Stephen Hawking backsliding in his statement about baby universes, but that was in the context of black holes that had nothing to do with cosmology. That quote was taken completely out of context. Finally, he makes a big deal about Boltzmann brains. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Most importantly, he talks about the fact that if the universe is eternal and you have a second law of thermodynamics, then there must have been a moment in the middle when the entropy was lowest, and he calls this a thermodynamic beginning and quotes another paper. That's fine, except it's equivocation on the word beginning. A thermodynamic beginning is not a beginning, it happens in the middle. It's a moment in the history of the universe from which the entropy is higher in one direction of time and the other direction of time. There is no room in such a conception for God to have brought the universe into existence at any one moment. If you really believe that the beginning of the universe is an important piece of evidence for God, an eternal universe with a low entropy state in the middle is not helping your case. What you should be doing is trying to build models, like I said. So the question is, are there realistic models of eternal cosmologies? Well, I spent half an hour on the internet. I was able to come up with about 17 different plausible-looking models of eternal cosmologies. I do not claim that any of these is the right answer. We're nowhere near the right answer yet. But you can come up with objections to every one of these models. You cannot say that they are not eternal. There's a theorem, Bordet-Guth and Vilenkin, that has assumptions, so if you violate those assumptions, you can violate the theorem. Meanwhile, theism, I would argue, is not a serious cosmological model. That's because cosmology is a mature subject. We care about more things than just creating the universe. We care about specific details. At the cosmology conferences, we're discussing these questions that you see before you. I'm not going to list all of them, but a real cosmological model wants to predict what is the amount of density perturbation in the universe and so forth. Theism does not even try to do this because ultimately theism is not well defined.
Consider first the evidence for the beginning of the universe from the expansion of the universe and thermodynamics. Now, to my surprise, Dr. Carroll challenges the first premise of this argument by saying it's based on outmoded Aristotelian concepts of causality. I protest, not at all. There is no analysis given of what it means to be a cause in this first premise. You can adopt your favorite theory of causation or take causation to be a conceptual primitive. All it requires is that the universe didn't pop into being uncaused out of absolutely nothing. And if that's the price of non-theism, then I think the non-theist is welcome to it. Dr. Carroll says, but on the Hartle-Hawking model, the universe is uncaused. Not at all. Such a model comes into being, or rather the universe comes into being on such a model, and there's nothing in the theory that would explain why that universe exists rather than not. The model may be self-contained, but that's perfectly consistent with my arguments. I'm not arguing for some kind of interventionist deity, but rather why does the universe exist? Why did it come into being at all? Now, with respect to the second premise, Dr. Carroll says there are all kinds of beginningless models of the universe. Well, it's certainly true that such models exist, but the problem is none of them is successful. Slide 32, please. As Jim Sinclair has shown in our article in the Blackwell Companion, all of the models that Dr. Carroll has mentioned have been shown to be either untenable or not to avert the beginning of the universe. Alex Vilenkin says flatly, there are no models at this time that give a satisfactory model for a universe without a beginning. Consider in particular Dr. Carroll's own model. Slide 34, please. This model presupposes, the next slide, yes, it presupposes a reductionistic view of time according to which the direction of time is defined in terms of entropy increase. Now, in the model, notice that there are two arrows of time for the mother universe, pointing in opposite directions. So on this view of time, we don't really have an eternally existing mother universe here at all. Rather, you have two universes which share a common origin in the central surface. So what the model actually implies, rather than avoids, is a beginning of time and of the universe. Time has a beginning on this model, and therefore it involves all of the problems that are pertinent to the universe coming into being. Be that as it may, I think it's safe to say that there is no credible classical model of a beginningless universe today. Slide 35, please. Now, Dr. Carroll does hold out hope that quantum cosmology might serve to restore the past eternality of the universe. But I would say not only is there no evidence for such a hope, but I would agree with Vilenkin that if there is a quantum gravity regime prior to the Planck time, then that just is the beginning of the universe. And Dr. Carroll says, well, you can have quantum descriptions of the universe that are eternal, and that's certainly true. But the question is, why would the universe transition to classical space-time just 13 billion years ago? It could not have existed from infinity past in an unstable quantum state, and then just 13 billion years ago transition to classical space-time. It would have done it from eternity past, if at all. So I think we've got good evidence from the expansion of the universe that the universe probably began to exist. What about the evidence from thermodynamics? First is the problem of information loss to baby universes on his theory. And you'll recall that's why Stephen Hawking rejected the baby universe hypothesis. Now, Dr. Carroll responds, well, my mechanisms for generating the baby universes don't use Hawking's mechanisms. All right, but are they any more successful? I don't think so. According to Chris Weaver in his article on the Carroll-Chen model, he says the Fari-Guth and Guven nucleation that Dr. Carroll uses out of a de Sitter spacetime is merely speculative, and Carroll's discussion should be thought of it as exploratory. It is therefore safe to conclude that a central piece of the model is missing, and so the Carroll-Chen model is incomplete in that it does not have a clear recommended dynamical path from the background spacetime to the birth of universes like ours. In fact, Weaver goes on to point out that for a universe described by the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem like ours, these Fari-Guth-Guven mechanisms cannot produce such a universe, and therefore these mechanisms fail. I also secondly pointed out that there's a Boltzmann brain problem with respect to Dr. Carroll's model. And it seems to me that he just didn't respond to the point that I was making, namely, since every baby universe grows into a de Sitter space, there will be vastly, vastly more of these Boltzmann brains in the long run than there will be ordinary observers. And so what Dr. Carroll would need to do is to justify some non-standard measure of probability that would make ordinary observers more probable than Boltzmann brains. But he admits that he cannot do it. We also then saw that the quantum gravity will not avert this conclusion because of the Wall theorem, which should be valid for the quantum gravity era and requires a beginning of the universe. So it seems to me we've got good evidence from the expansion of the universe and from thermodynamics that the universe is probably not past eternal, but began to exist.
So let's go to the Kalam cosmological argument. There's a deep philosophical difference between us. I claim that a consistent, complete model that fits the data, accounts for what we see in the world, is a success. There's no right that we have to demand more than that. And I believe that Dr. Craig's response was, yes, there is. I don't think this counts as a very good response. It's a very difficult thing because the universe is different than our everyday experience. That doesn't sound like a surprising statement, but we really need to take it to heart. To look at a modern cosmological model and say, yes, but what was the cause, is like looking at someone taking pictures with an iPhone and saying, but where does the film go? It's not that the answer is difficult or inscrutable, it's completely the wrong question to be asking. And in fact, it's a little technical, most of this, my second talk here, but I think it's worth getting it right. Why should we expect that there are causes or explanations or reason why in the universe in which we live? It's because the physical world inside of which we're embedded has two important features. There are unbreakable patterns, laws of physics. Things don't just happen, they obey the laws. And there is an arrow of time stretching from the past to the future. The entropy was lower in the past, increases toward the future. Therefore, when you find some event or state of affairs B today, we can very often trace it back in time to one or a couple of possible predecessor events that we therefore call the cause of that, which leads to be according to the laws of physics. But crucially, both of these features of the universe that allow us to speak the language of causes and effects are completely absent when we talk about the universe as a whole. We don't think that our universe is part of a bigger ensemble that obeys laws. Even if it's part of the multiverse is not part of a bigger ensemble that obeys laws. Therefore, nothing gives us the right to demand some kind of external cause. The idea that our intuitions about cause and effect that we get from the everyday experience of the world in this room should somehow be extended without modification to the fundamental nature of reality is fairly absurd. On a more specific level, we talked about my model. Again, I'm not trying to defend my model. I'm the first one to say that it has problems. None of the problems that it has are the ones that Dr. Craig raised. He says that it's not really eternal, which it is hard to express the extent to which I think this is grasping at straws. The axis for time goes to the top and the bottom, and it goes forever. The only sense in which this universe is not eternal is that there is a moment in the middle where the entropy is lowest. I made the point in my opening speech that that has nothing to do with the kind of beginning you would need to give God room to work, and as far as I can recall, Dr. Craig didn't address that argument. He does say that it is speculative, the idea of baby universes coming into existence, the first to agree. It's completely speculative. He quotes a paper that says that the mechanism by which baby universes are created is speculative and might not be right. Again, it's completely true. He claims to use it to say that unitarity is violated, even though the quote he read didn't mention unitarity and wasn't about unitarity. That is not a sensible objection. I will repeat the quantum eternity theorem, a sensible place for beginning analysis of the history of the universe might be with the rules of quantum mechanics. He claims that someone else said that there might be a singularity in quantum gravity, but he gives us no understanding. He simply repeats his previous analysis. So I want to draw attention not to my model, but to the model of Anthony Aguirre and Stephen Grattan, because this is perfectly well defined. This is a bouncing cosmology that is infinite in time. It goes from minus infinity to infinity. It has classical description everywhere. There's no possible sense in which this universe comes into existence at some moment in time. And I would really like Dr. Craig to explain to us why this universe is not okay. Now, you might think that, there's a theorem by Alan Guth and Arvind Borde and Alex Vilenkin that says the universe had a beginning. I've explained to you why that's not true, but in case you don't trust me, I happen to have Alan Guth right here, one of the authors of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem. Alan, what do you say? He says, I don't know whether the universe had a beginning. I suspect the universe didn't have a beginning. It's very likely eternal, but nobody knows. Now, how in the world can the author of the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem say the universe is probably eternal for the reasons I've already told you? The theorem is only about classical descriptions of the universe, not about the universe itself.
Now let's look again at those arguments that I defended. First, the Kalam cosmological argument. Dr. Carroll challenges the first premise that if the universe came into existence, there is a transcendent cause that brought the universe into being. And honestly, I'm quite astonished that he would think the universe can literally pop into being out of nothing. Let me just give 3 arguments for why there must be a cause. First of all, it seems to me a metaphysical first principle that being doesn't come from non-being, that things don't just pop into existence from literally nothing. Nothingness has no properties, no potentialities. It's not anything. And so it seems to me inconceivable metaphysically to think the universe could come into being from nothing. Secondly, if the universe could come into being from nothing, then why is it that only universes can pop into being out of nothing? Why not bicycles and Beethoven and root beer? What makes nothingness so discriminatory? If universes could pop into being out of nothing, then anything and everything should pop into being out of nothing. Since it doesn't, that suggests that things that come into being have causes. And finally, all the empirical evidence we have supports the truth of the causal principle. When Dr. Carroll says, but the universe is different than our experience, this is really committing what Alexander Proust calls the taxi cab fallacy. That is to say, you go with the causal principle until you reach your desired goal, and then you think you can just dismiss it like a hack because you don't want there to be a cause of your entity, the universe. But if the universe came into existence, if the universe is not eternal, then surely it would need to have a cause. And in fact, to deny this is unscientific because the whole project of contemporary cosmogony is to try to find what is the cause of the universe. So on his principle, it would be a science stopper and would destroy his very field of expertise. Now, with respect to the second premise that the universe did begin to exist, could we have slide 33, please? In response to my argument that he actually has an origin of time going in 2 opposite directions, do we have slide 33? Alas. No, the one before it. That's 34. There, look at that diagram. This is a different diagram. Notice on this diagram, you have a non-reductionistic arrow of time that goes from past to future. This is not an arrow of time that is determined by entropy increase as he had in the other diagram. This is a non-reductionistic view of time that Professor Maudlin and I believe in, where entropy, the direction of entropy increase doesn't define the direction of time. On this model, the universe contracts down from eternity past for infinity to a relatively low entropy point and then begins to expand again. And that kind of model is physically impossible. It contradicts the second law of thermodynamics. That's why you've got to have the arrows pointing in both directions if you want to hope for this model to be realistic. But if you have a double-headed arrow of time in both directions, then you've got a beginning of time and of the universe. So I want to co-opt Dr. Carroll's model for myself. On his model of the universe began to exist along with time. I also pointed out that on the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, there are no classical models that succeed in showing the universe to be beginningless. And he rightly points out this is just classical space-time. But then I've never heard really a response to my claim that if there is a quantum gravity era prior to the Planck time, that it would have to be itself finite, because otherwise it becomes inexplicable why classical space-time only came into being 13 billion years ago, rather than from eternity past. So I think we've got good evidence for the beginning of the universe from the expansion of the universe. As for thermodynamics, here I argued that in order to explain why we are in a low entropy state, the standard answer is the universe began relatively recently with its low entropy condition at the beginning. By contrast, his model, I charged, violates the unitarity of quantum physics. He says, no, because I'm not using the same mechanisms as Hawking. But then I pointed out that the mechanisms that he appeals to are both conjectural and actually incompatible with the universe described by the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, as Christopher Weaver points out in his critique of the model. Secondly, the Boltzmann brane problem, I don't think that Dr. Carroll has really come to grips with this, quite honestly. There are at least two reasons why Boltzmann branes would dominate. First, because on his multiverse model, in the long run, every baby universe becomes a de Sitter space and will be dominated by Boltzmann branes. Secondly, because in all of the other worlds that are not fine-tuned, there just aren't any ordinary observers, but there will be thermal fluctuations that produce Boltzmann branes. And so he's the one who has to justify some non-standard measure of probability in order to explain why ordinary observers like us should exist rather than Boltzmann branes. Then I appealed to the Wall theorem to show that even on a quantum gravity theory, you're not going to avoid the beginning of the universe. Dr. Carroll may have responded to this, but if he did, it went by so quick I didn't hear it. So it seems to be we've still got the Wall theorem showing that the quantum, even in quantum gravity era, there has to be a beginning.
First, I want to notice some of the things he did say. He said he was astonished that I refused to accept the fact that things need causes to happen, to which I can only quote David Lewis, I do not know how to refute an incredulous stare. I tried to give the reason why the causation analysis that we use for objects within the universe does not apply to the universe, but that more or less whizzed on by. Dr. Craig gets a lot of mileage out of the presumed nuttiness of things just popping into existence. Why don't bicycles just pop into existence? Again, I tried to explain what makes the universe different, but more importantly, the phrase popping into existence is not the right one to use when you're talking about the universe. It sounds as if it's something that happens in time, but that's not the right way to do it because there is no before the beginning, if there is a beginning. The correct thing to say is there was a first moment of time. When you say it that way, it doesn't sound so implausible. The question is there a model in which that's true? Do the equations of the model hang together? Does the model fit the data? And we have plausibly positive answers to all of those. He spends a lot of time on my own model, more time than I would have spent on it. He is upset that I did not include an arrow at the bottom in my axis on the compared to the graph, when I drew the graph previously. I don't care about that, to be very honest. The double arrows here are just to express the fact that there's no intrinsic arrow of time. The arrow of time that we experience is because of the behavior of matter in the universe, the entropy increasing. And he says that that's in violation of the second law of thermodynamics. Yes, it is an explanation of the second law of thermodynamics. This is the reason why we, in our little part of the universe, observe the second law. He mentions once again Boltzmann branes, and he says that there should be more Boltzmann branes than ordinary observers. I again explain why that's not true, because it's a model-dependent statement. In this particular model, it turns out to be easier to make a universe than to make a brane. That's a selling point of the model.